The boy couldn't hold it in much longer. He bit down hard on his pencil, his feet swinging back and forth. But class had just started. It would be a while before it ended. Finally, he couldn't help himself. The whole class burst out laughing as the teacher shot him a withering glare, the kind of look that said she'd reached her breaking point. She refused to believe the boy was sick, convinced instead that he was deliberately disrupting her class. She forced him to apologize to everyone. The truth was, he had a strange condition that made him produce involuntary sounds he couldn't control. From the first day of school, Brad had been given all sorts of nicknames. Dog, duck, and pig were among the nicer ones. The cruel ones were psycho and freak. Bullies picked on him, while others simply kept their distance. Even the teachers couldn't stand him. They constantly called his mother in, warning that if he didn't shape up, he'd be expelled. Back then, there was no internet. Brad's family had no idea what was wrong with him, and even mental health professionals couldn't figure it out. Thankfully, Brad had an amazing mother. She believed her son wasn't just acting out. She spent countless hours at the library, going through book after book, until finally, she found it. Tourette syndrome. It's a neurological condition where the brain sends faulty signals, causing involuntary physical movements and sounds. His mother immediately took Brad to see a doctor, but when she learned there was no cure, she broke down right there. That's when Brad rushed over to comfort her, saying with remarkable confidence, "We'll get through this together." Brad is based on a real person, and his incredibly inspiring story was adapted into a film. Soon after, his mother took Brad to a Tourette syndrome support group. The patients there displayed all kinds of symptoms. Some had tics, some would jerk backward, others would curl up. But during discussions, instead of supporting each other, people just complained about society's injustices. Schools, movie theaters, workplaces, nowhere would accept them. Everyone was spreading negativity. One mother had even pulled her child out of school in 3rd grade. Brad's mother immediately took him and left. She told Brad to never become someone who blames the world for their problems. The worse your luck, the harder you need to fight back. In middle school, Brad became the school laughingstock again, enduring endless mockery and bullying. In class, teachers made him face the back wall. When he kept making sounds, there was that look again. Brad was sent to the principal's office. There, he met someone who would change his life forever, the principal himself. The principal looked Brad squarely in the eye and asked him what school was for. Just as Brad was about to apologize, the principal cut him off. School exists to educate, to replace ignorance with knowledge. He then arranged for Brad to attend the school's music concert that day. Brad was terrified. He never dared attend such events. Sure enough, throughout the entire concert, he made sounds that prevented everyone from enjoying the music. Students and teachers alike stared at him. Some laughed, others glared. Brad was utterly humiliated. When the concert ended, the principal took the stage and asked Brad, the boy who'd been making noises the whole time, to come up. So with everyone watching, Brad had no choice but to go up. He was ready for whatever came, a lecture, an apology. He was used to it. Once on stage, the principal asked if he enjoyed disrupting things. Brad said no. The principal asked why he kept making noises. Brad explained that he had Tourette syndrome. When the principal asked what that was, Brad explained the condition to the entire school, how it worked and what the symptoms were. The principal asked if he could control it. Brad said he couldn't, and that it couldn't be cured. Finally, the principal asked one more question. "What can we do to help you?" Brad simply answered, "I just want to be treated like everyone else." The principal let him return to his seat. As Brad walked off stage, the entire school spontaneously burst into applause. Whether it was sympathy or encouragement, for the first time in his life, Brad felt understood. For the first time, he realized he didn't need to apologize. He looked gratefully at the principal, who was smiling back at him. With just a few words, no lectures, no commands, that man had helped a child find healing. That's the power of education. From that day forward, Brad made up his mind. He was going to become a teacher. Years later, when he fought through his condition to graduate from college and pursued his dream of teaching, he faced even worse prejudice, because sometimes adult bias is harder to change than children's. At every interview, his interviewers wore the same expression. Some openly showed their disgust, others tried to suppress it. Still others went from big smiles to stone-faced silence, all because Brad constantly interjected involuntary sounds while speaking. He also had uncontrollable tics. Everywhere Brad went, people stared. Forget libraries, restaurants, or movie theaters. Sometimes he'd be kicked off golf courses just for disturbing others. He'd faced this kind of treatment his whole life. Despite having this condition, he wanted to be a teacher. It was his lifelong dream. But who would accept a teacher who couldn't stop making strange noises? He hit wall after wall. Every interview ended in rejection. Most people politely declined, but some had the audacity to ask him outright, "Why would someone with your condition want to be a teacher?" They'd demand, "If you want to teach, you need to learn to keep quiet." When that happened, of course he'd push back, but when he was alone, he'd fall apart. In those moments, he desperately wanted to control the sounds. He hated this affliction, but the noises would defiantly emerge again and again. He'd hit himself, bite himself, but couldn't make it stop. All he could do was break down crying, taking forever to calm down. When no school would hire him, he took construction jobs while continuing to apply, one school after another. After interviewing at 24 schools, he finally found a special elementary school. The principal there warmly welcomed him. Brad smiled again. He carefully explained his condition, then told the principal that Tourette syndrome was his greatest teacher. He wanted to use himself as an example to show kids that no matter what obstacles you face, you're worth fighting for. This time, Brad got the job. He'd actually become a teacher, but he still hadn't proven he was a good one. He enthusiastically prepared to welcome his first class of students. However, these students had all been transferred from other classes. Naturally, teachers had offloaded the ones they didn't want to deal with. Sure enough, as Brad greeted the kids at the door, one boy called him a weirdo, right to his face. When the first class began, Brad explained his condition to the children and invited their questions. Some kids mocked him openly, but he wasn't offended, remaining calm and patient throughout. The boy who'd called him a weirdo started wandering around the classroom. This time, Brad didn't back down, telling the child he needed to raise his hand before leaving his seat. Predictably, the boy called him a weirdo again. After class, another teacher told Brad she'd been that boy's previous teacher but couldn't handle his various issues. ADHD, OCD, attention deficit disorder. Bottom line, he was completely unsuited for school. She suggested Brad just have him expelled. Brad had heard those exact words countless times growing up. Many teachers had wanted him expelled too, so now he refused to show that same rejection to this boy. One day, he saw the boy run out of class and write profanities on the bathroom wall. Brad gave him detention. After school, he had a real heart-to-heart with the boy, who admitted he'd always hated reading. That's when Brad first shared his own story. He'd hated reading too. Every child with Tourette syndrome struggles with concentration. He had the boy experience it firsthand. Brad pretended to have tics, while the boy tried to read, constantly making noise to disrupt his focus. Afterward, the boy said, "Wow, that's really hard for you. Compared to that, reading is actually easy for me." Through Brad's patient guidance and support, the boy began to settle down and read. Just like that, he'd saved a child who'd been written off. Brad continued pouring his heart into teaching until he met a girl he couldn't save. Brad noticed something odd. Every time he saw this little girl, she had less and less hair. When he asked what was wrong, she casually mentioned it was just a small side effect from chemotherapy, then walked away. Brad stood frozen for a long time. The little girl had cancer. From that day on, Brad was even more attentive to her, teaching her carefully every day, looking after her, trying to make her happy. The sweet little girl always wore a smile. She told Brad her only worry was seeing her family secretly crying. One day, she stopped coming to school. Brad had the whole class make gifts for her. But a few weeks later, the terrible news came. The little girl had passed away. At her funeral, Brad stood outside the church, directing each child inside one by one. After everyone had entered, he chose to stay outside. His Tourette syndrome made him constantly vocalize, and in such a solemn setting, he didn't want to intrude. He didn't want to disturb people's grief. Just as he was about to leave, the church door opened. It was the little girl's mother. She'd come to get Brad. He tried to decline, but she said, "You were my daughter's favorite teacher. She never minded your sounds, and she wouldn't now either." Brad agreed. So with tears streaming down his face and symptoms flaring, he slowly walked into the church. Everyone there had heard of him, the unusual but wonderful teacher who'd been there for the little girl during her final days. Not a single person judged him. Even a child you can't save is worth your whole heart, because in the end, you might not just be saving her, you might be saving everyone around her, and maybe even yourself. Brad continued teaching. While fulfilling his life's purpose, he also tackled other goals, like pursuing graduate studies. For someone with his condition, that was incredibly difficult. First, he had to arrange for a private testing room since testing with others would be disruptive. But even alone, it was brutally hard. He had to use every ounce of willpower to suppress his urges just to focus on reading and answering questions. He failed many more times than most people ever would. In his personal life, he finally found someone who accepted his condition. He overcame his insecurities and shared his world with her, promising to spend his life with her. He even changed his father's mind. The man who'd rejected him for years finally understood his son's strength. Through all this effort, he was no longer seen as just a patient by those around him. He'd built a normal life for himself. The film ends with Brad being nominated by his school and named the state's Teacher of the Year. At the award ceremony, every important person in his life was there. He'd become more successful than many typical people ever would be. When he stepped up to the podium to give his acceptance speech, sure enough, he made those familiar sounds. But this time, no one minded. He told the audience that his greatest teacher had been his Tourette syndrome. Just as he was about to explain what he'd learned, his students began raising their hands to answer for him. Brad happily agreed. The children said he'd learned to be strong, to persevere, to fight. One inspiring answer after another came from those young voices, proving what a motivating and gifted educator the man on stage truly was. That's where the movie ends. But this real person's powerful life story continues on. Inspirational stories often come with cliched lessons. It's okay if you don't remember the lessons, but please remember this smile. The smile that appeared countless times throughout the film and left the deepest impression on so many people. Because Brad smiled after embarrassing himself, after failing, after being mocked, after being mistreated. We're always taught to grit our teeth and fight against fate, but we're rarely taught that while we're fighting, we should also smile at life. Success doesn't necessarily mean happiness, and often that one small step toward happiness is exactly that, a smile.